History is often a cycle of blood, a series of debts that are eventually paid in the most excruciating currencies imaginable. In the year 867 CE, the cold winds of Northumbria carried a scent that the local population had never encountered: the smell of total, systematic retribution. The man at the center of this storm was King Aella, or Aelle, a ruler who had climbed to power through conflict, only to find himself the target of the most feared warriors in Europe, the sons of the legendary Viking leader Ragnar Lothbrok. Aella had committed a transgression that the Norse code of honor could never ignore. Years earlier, he had reportedly executed Ragnar by throwing him into a stone pit filled with venomous snakes. As Ragnar lay dying, surrounded by writhing serpents, he did not beg for mercy. Instead, he laughed, prophesying that his little pigs would come to grunt when they heard how the old boar suffered. Today, on Last Breath Records, we examine the archival records of that grunting, the arrival of the great heathen army, and the performance of a ritual so horrific that its very existence is still debated by historians. We go beyond the myths to look at the clinical, agonizing reality of the blood eagle. To understand the end of King Aella, one must first understand the death of Ragnar Lothbrok. The Northumbrian king believed he had ended a pagan threat through a display of Christian power. By casting Ragnar into the snake pit, Aella intended to show that the Viking gods were powerless against a stone wall and a handful of serpents. But the Vikings did not see it as an ending. They saw it as a beginning. When news of their father's death reached the brothers, Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, and Hitsirk, they did not merely mourn. They assembled a force of thousands, a coalition of Norse tribes that the English called the Great Heathen Army. Their purpose was singular: to transform Northumbria into a graveyard and King Aella into a living exhibition of agony. The invasion was decisive. The Viking forces crossed the North Sea and struck at the heart of the kingdom. Aella, perhaps realizing too late that his snake pit victory had invited a demonic response, attempted to rally his forces outside the city of York. The Northumbrian defense was utterly overwhelmed. The Viking warriors, driven by the sacred duty of avenging a father, fought with a ferocity that shattered the English lines. In the chaos of the defeat, exactly as the Norsemen had planned, King Aella was captured alive. For a king, capture was often a prelude to a ransom or a swift beheading. But Ivar the Boneless, Ragnar's most ruthless son, had something far more theatrical in mind. The captured king was brought to the Viking camp, where warriors gathered in a silent, expectant circle to witness the performance of the ritual. The blood eagle was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was a calculated ceremony of suffering, designed to mirror the eagle, a bird sacred to Odin, the All-Father. First, Aella was stripped of his royal garments, his skin exposed to the freezing Northumbrian dawn. His hands and feet were bound tightly with rawhide straps. These straps were specifically chosen because they would shrink as they dried, cutting into his flesh and ensuring that his body remained perfectly rigid during the procedure. He was forced face down onto a massive wooden table, his back presented as the canvas for the brothers' art. Ivar the Boneless approached with a sharp knife. The first stage of the blood eagle was the spinal incision. With practiced precision, Ivar made a deep cut along the entire length of the king's spine. Blood flowed immediately, soaking the wooden table, but this was merely the surface of the pain. Using the tip of the blade, the executioners began to separate the skin and muscle from the back, exposing the ribcage. Aella was fully conscious, his screams echoing across the silent camp, a sound that the Vikings likely interpreted as the music of their revenge. There was no mercy shown. No quick death was granted. Once the ribs were exposed, the ritual entered its most physically demanding phase. Using specialized bone tools, Ivar and his brothers systematically broke each rib at the point where it met the spine. The sound of cracking bone punctuated Aella's weakening cries. As each rib was severed, it was pulled outward, away from the body, splaying them like the extended wings of a bird. This process caused catastrophic damage to the surrounding muscle tissue and the nervous system, but it was not yet fatal. The goal was to keep the victim alive as long as possible, to maximize the symbolic value of the eagle. To ensure Aella did not succumb to shock too early, historical accounts suggest that the Vikings forced stimulants down his throat. His heart continued to pump, driving blood through a body that was being hollowed out. In a move of supreme cruelty, salt was rubbed into the open wounds on his back. The chemical reaction on the exposed nerves would have sent waves of electrical agony through his system, forcing a level of lucidity that the human brain was never meant to endure. Then came the final, most horrific phase. The executioners reached into the still-living king's body cavity. They grasped his lungs and carefully pulled them through the gaps created by the broken ribs. The lungs were draped over the wings of bone on his back. As Aella gasped for his final breaths, The lungs would flutter and pulse, giving the appearance of bloody eagle wings beating in the air. Death finally claimed King Aella only when his lungs were fully extracted and his internal systems collapsed under the weight of the trauma. His last breath was not a warrior's cry, but a wet, parasitic gasp through a throat no longer connected to a functional respiratory system. The blood eagle was complete. The king who had executed the old boar in a snake pit had been transformed into a bird of prey, a permanent reminder of the Norse reach beyond the grave. His remains were left on the table, a rotting exhibition of dynastic destruction. The story of the blood eagle remains the most horrific royal execution in medieval history. While some modern scholars question the physical possibility of the ritual, the Norse sagas and the English chronicles record it with a haunting consistency. Whether it was literal fact or psychological warfare, the idea of the blood eagle was enough to terrify the Christian world for centuries. At Last Breath Records, we look at these moments to understand the lengths to which human beings will go for the sake of legacy and revenge. King Aella's wings may have been an illusion of bone and flesh, but the record of his suffering is etched forever into the archives of the painful past. Thank you for joining us for this archival look at the wings of retribution. If you have the stomach for more, stay tuned to Last Breath Records for our next entry into the annals of agony.